A very interesting documentary is about to be screened in selected cinemas across Australia. And that is a film called Splice Here, a Projected Odyssey. And what is so interesting about this documentary, and something that I'm particularly interested in, is the issue of film versus digital recordings, and the whole issue of whether we lose film or not. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Splice Here, Rob Murphy. Rob, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Good morning. Thank you, Peter. Great to be here.
And you are a projectionist, as it comes up in the film. You work at the Sun Theatre and so on with 70mm film, all that sort of thing. How did it come about that you were able to make this feature documentary?
It's a long road. It's a 10-year journey. It started off really out of that profession of being a projectionist, a filmmaker, and a projectionist, because the landscape changed very, very quickly. You'd go into work one week at some cinema, and suddenly the projector would be gone. There'd be this big digital box sitting there. And so, I mean, we all knew it was coming, but I guess I started the film because I have a filmmaking background and I'm a projectionist. Who else is more qualified to make a film about it? And lots of people made some really lovely little short films at the time, and that's all I thought it was going to be too. But most of those films were just about the death, about the end of film. And as I started shooting, and it went on and on and on, and as more people found out about what I was doing, they'd say, "Oh, look, you've got to come over and shoot this. So this is happening, or that's being torn out." And so it was kind of this. I just ran for the first 2 years, really, and then out of that, more and more parts of the whole survival of film story kind of hit me, and more things presented themselves. And before I knew it, I was making something much bigger.
Well, congratulations on that, because the amount of film clips that you use, the interviews with people like Leonard Maltin and Douglas Trumbull, etc. It's just fascinating the way you collected all that and filmed all that. Were you able to have production behind you, financing, and that sort of thing to be able to do all this?
No, we didn't get money until the last 2 years, until the film was essentially cut, where I was able to show Screen Australia the film virtually finished. So they gave us PEP money at that point. So up until that point, yes, it was all privately funded, either coming out of my pocket, or I had an executive producer who was putting some money in. We did a crowdfunding campaign in 2019, which got me and my cinematographer Joanne to the States for 3 weeks. But before that, we'd already been to Bradford, we'd been to Canberra, we'd been all over Australia. Yeah, so it's just kind of it's all been scraped together. It's a project of a love letter, a project of love.
Well, well done on that, and I can imagine that COVID would have also affected the way that you made the film.
Oh, look, the timing was impeccable. We just finished shooting that American trip. That was the last part of our shooting at the end of 2019, and then COVID hit. The Screen Australia money came in, and I was able to edit the film for 12 months virtually uninterrupted. And you never get that kind of, luxury when you're cutting a film. So yeah, it was all really good timing for me.
Well, well done on that. I'm going to come back to the editing a bit later. Now, let's talk about some of the issues, because one of my bugbears, of course, is how film, nitrate film in particular, dissolves or burns up or whatever and disappears, and that you make the point that so many films have been lost, especially silent films, but also more recent films, because they're just not available and there's no more film prints, that sort of thing. That is a huge issue, isn't it? This whole notion of films being preserved.
Yeah, look, and it's largely unknown with the public. I mean, I say in the film, as a kid and as you're growing up, you think, this is my favorite film. I love this film. I know that it's somewhere being looked after, but that's not always the case. A lot of films slip through the cracks. A lot of films are archived in a proper way, but they're sitting on a shelf somewhere and they're going off. And it's not until, I mean, one of my interviewees from the Library of Congress talks about how you have to come to terms with the fact that you can't save everything. There is just too much there. By the time you go to a shelf and you're ready to restore it, you open the can, the print's gone, and that may be the only print. The negative may be gone. No one knows where it might be. The other part of that, of course, is the collectors, the projectionist underground and the collectors underground. These people that have been saving film prints throughout their careers in the movies, and quite often they have the only existing print, and they're sort of becoming the unsung heroes of film preservation.
Incredible story, and it's so important that we have institutions like the National Film and Sound Archive, who also are in the film, to preserve films, and yet funding for NFSA and to some extent other preservation authorities around the world tends to be limited, and that's such a shame, because we need to, especially in Australia, preserve as much as possible of Australian film history.
That's absolutely right, and we're losing things, as I said, in that process of not being able to get to them enough. There's not enough funding. It seems to be slashed every year. So the NFSA is kind of run on a lot of passionate people who I met there, who are just so dedicated to the cause and are trying to save as much as they can before it's gone. But there's kind of a three-pronged approach to this, and that is preservation, restoration, and then accessibility. And preservation is the bit that doesn't get enough attention. By the time someone's decided to restore it, the money is there, or the will is there to actually do the work to do it. But there's the part before that is the preservation. It's got to be still there on the shelf when they go to take it off and start the restoration. So, every now and then we've got to open those cans, check them, see if, because you don't know how quickly things are going to go off, how quickly they're going to fall apart. It's impossible to predict. The chemical properties of every print is going to be slightly different. So you can store it at the right temperature and the right humidity and everything, but you really don't know whether it's still going to be there when you open that tin.
Exactly. And there's also the issue, of course, of how long can film be preserved for, as opposed to a digital version of the film where it does exist. Is one better than the other? And you make the point that it's hard to tell.
Well, there are lots of different ways of doing preservation now, and the studios still mostly do what's called YCM color separations, where they actually separate the color elements of the film onto black and white prints, because black and white lasts much longer, and they store it as 3 black and white prints, and then they can reconstitute it later. Another interesting thing that's developed is that digital films are being stored as digital information on a film print. So they're actually printing not ones and zeros, but whatever the barcode is or whatever it is that represents the digital information in a visual way onto film, because we know that film will be, if it's stored properly from the get-go, it will still be there in 300 years. We know that. But digital is, we don't know. It's not regarded as an archival medium. We're still trying to find the best ways of storing digital information.
Hopefully that exploration can continue, because it's so important that we do preserve so much. Now, it's interesting also looking at the art of cinema projection, and that is such an important art and skill, which of course would be lost with DCPs, with digital projection, and of course a film like Cinema Paradiso and others bring that to the fore, and it's great to see those clips. And so for you, it's an interesting development in terms of projectionists being lost because of digital transformation.
Well, yes, it's certainly a profession that's fallen away. There are not many film projectionists left. They've either retired or they've been made redundant. And digital is it's all keyed about, it's all about making it more cost effective for the future. And we can't begrudge the studios for that, because really making 400 prints of every single film that comes along, showing them for maybe a month, and then junking all of that film again, it's really bad ecologically. It couldn't have gone on, really. So digital is great in that way. But yes, it's really it's a machine up the back that's doing its own thing. There's nobody there with it. If something goes wrong, more or less, one of the patrons has to go downstairs and tell them. So, and I mean, we at the Sun and a lot of other cinemas, of course, we still take our digital projection very seriously, and we set it up and keep it running. But a lot of places have just plugged in their projector, turned it on, and forgotten about it. And these machines, they take a lot more maintenance than a film projector did. They need to be calibrated almost monthly by a very specialized technician. And so a lot of presentations are playing very dull or off spec. And it's a terrible experience compared to what film used to be, where you had a professional up there watching it, checking it, tweaking it all the time. And the other thing is that, I mean, I'm showing that where my prejudices lie are in film, because it really does look breathtaking. But most films that are released, mainstream films, are still released as 2K. About 2K, about 70% of films are still 2K. And 2K is 4 times less what 35mm used to be. And, there's all this sensationalism about, 4K is wonderful. Yeah, film was always 4K. That's what people don't realize. Digital has only just caught up with what film used to do. And we now have laser projectors. We're 10 years on from the implementation of digital. At the laser projectors, I have to say, look really great. So I think we've just sort of kind of caught up with how it should look. But most digital projectors around town, I think, look muddy. The blacks are green. There's a lot of technical information that I could, give you here, but I think at the end of the day, it's just the aesthetic. It's what it looks like, it's what it feels like when you're watching the film. And most digital is still got a long way to do to catch up with film.
Absolutely, especially on the big screen, which is the best place to see a film. And it's interesting too, you mentioned laser projection. I witnessed the at IMAX in Melbourne, the change from film to the platter approach in film to their digital laser technology, and the transformation that's happened there. And you've got Richard Morrison in the film, and so it's so interesting how all of this has evolved. A lot of it, of course, is makes it easier to show films. Of course, the whole digital sort of landscape, but film still has that fantastic look about it, which is going to be hard to usurp. Well,
it's also entrenched in the art form, I think. Like everything's been on film for 120 years roughly, and it has, the medium itself has become part of the art form. And so one of the things we talk about is legacy cinema, and okay, how are we going to access those films in the future? Well, all the distributors say, well, we'll transfer it all to DCP, and I was like, that's fine, but it doesn't look the same. And then you get down to that whole nitty gritty of, okay, if this is an art form, what are we seeing on screen? And it's important to see it in the right way. And so if you're seeing, an inferior copy in a digital way that doesn't look the way the filmmaker intended it to look, are you getting a genuine artistic experience?
Exactly. And you also bring up the whole issue of a film with high frame rate, which makes the film look look, terrific. It sort of bounces off the screen, but also gives it a sort of a slightly TV sort of air to it. And with Douglas Trumbull, he's developed all of this much further with his Magi approach, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And the one thing I love that he talked about was we used The Hobbit as, you know, the example of how high frame rates can look and how people didn't really like it. And he talks about the technical reasons why, in that a digital projector has no shutter. It's just one frame straight after another, bang, bang, bang. There's no change in between. With a film projector, of course, it's pulling down a frame, flashing it on the screen, and then pulling it back down. So in between each frame, you get a black moment from the shutter. And it's imperceivable to the eye. We don't know what's happening. But that, again, that is part of the film look. It's part of that romantic look. There's something about it. And so with The Hobbit, they didn't introduce that shutter closure. And so it looked like video and it looked like an electronic medium. And that's what videotape looks like. When you watch TV, you know, you see back in the day, we used to watch things that were shot on 16 mil and things that were shot on video in the same program. When they cut from one scene to the other, the difference was enormous. And it's because it's a completely different medium. And videotape has no shutter, film does. It's a different look. So Magi was, you know, I got to see it firsthand, and it was amazing. It's that hyper reality of, it looks like you're sitting there looking through a window, but it didn't have that horrible video look about it.
Incredible, incredible. Hopefully that will be developed further, but we'll see what happens with that. And I love the way you bring up the whole issue of Cinerama, which I still have memories of, as well as Panavision and CinemaScope and everything that was to entice people back into cinemas when television sort of hit, and 3D sort of an aspect of that as well. So it's interesting how projection has evolved in terms of how wide a film is, and using Cinerama, which is three films meshed into one, going all the way back to Napoleon, of course, Abel Gantz's film from 1927 that you raised. Amazing how the technology has changed and developed over time.
Yeah, well, Cinerama is, I kind of use that as the backbone of the story, or the adventure, if you will, is that search for what happened to Cinerama in Australia. And that leads me all over the world. But Cinerama was, for those who don't know, the process that changed everything in movies. Up until 1952, everything was essentially square, 4:3, mostly in black and white and mostly mono. So that was the way everybody saw their movies. And then in 1952, this process came along that used 3 cameras and 3 projectors to create this huge 146-degree curved image with 7 channels of sound. And it took the world by storm. Within 12 months, all of the studios had abandoned 4:3 photography, and they all had their own widescreen process. The 50s was this widescreen war. Everybody was trying to come up with something new. It was quite amazing. But I still think of the 60s as the golden era of widescreen epics, largely with David Lean's films, of course, but there's some amazing films in that period. But Cinerama is what started all that and fostered all that, and it lasted a long time.
Certainly did. But converting that then to the television screen meant a whole range of issues. And I love the pan and scan approach where people were talking to the distance to, you couldn't see who they were talking to until there was an artificial pan that was introduced.
Yes. Well, a lot of younger people wouldn't have experienced that. And as I say in the film, it was, for me, I remember seeing those films on TV. And you would know that, you know, during the Good, Bad, and the Ugly opening sequence, all the credits were squashed into the square television, and anything that was behind the credits, like people, were all stretched out. And I thought, oh, this is a really interesting. I thought it was a style of filmmaking. And then when the credit sequence finished, we went back to normal. But then we're panning and scanning across the print, and they were very clunky. They're very mechanical. It wasn't smooth. It was just like suddenly the image would go. You know, it was very clunky. Because the only way of getting a widescreen image onto a square TV without doing a letterbox cropping, and no one would have put up with that back
Yeah,
then.
yeah. I'm so glad things have changed and we now have widescreen TVs and all that. But nevertheless,
Mm.
it's cinema is still the better way to see a film always. Um, Now, I had the great pleasure of meeting Quentin Tarantino when he was out here for The Hateful Eight, and he
Yes,
features quite prominently in your film, especially because he introduced the film at the Sun Theatre here in Melbourne, but also because he is such a great advocate for 70 millimeter for film, and that's so important that he's part of your documentary.
absolutely. And again, it was kind of not a fluke, but I was, well, we were kind of 6 years into shooting by then, and we'd already been to Bradford, and I knew that the Cinerama sequence was probably going to be the end of the film. But then this thing with the Hateful Eight came along, and for those who don't know, Hateful Eight is shot in 276 70 mil, which makes it technically a Cinerama film because there were two versions of Cinerama. But yeah, we heard about it, and I thought this would be, as a projectionist, I thought this would be so fun and cool to do. But in the back of my mind, it was like, this would be fantastic for my film. And further in the back of my mind, it's like, I wonder if Tarantino would actually come here. So we started the whole process, and it's well documented in the film. And I made a newsreel cut largely out of rushes that I'd shot for this documentary, because we show newsreels at the Sun and we wanted to promote what we were doing. We did that. We have a great relationship with Roadshow. They saw it. They sent it to him without me knowing. And before I knew it, Tarantino comes into the country, and he's got this media slug where he says, "Oh, yeah, I heard about these guys in Melbourne who were setting up the 70 mil, and I saw this newsreel and it made me cry." And he kept saying that everywhere he went. And that was our newsreel, of course. So that is essentially what inspired him to do a drop in at the Sun. And yeah, I got to film a little bit of him chatting in the bio box, but he's a lovely guy. I was kind of starstruck, and it's like, oh, what are we going to talk about? And the two of us couldn't shut up. We just, he's just a film nerd. He's just an amazing film nerd with incredible memory and very and a sharp talent.
Exactly. But it also indicates that it's the Sun Theatre and two other cinemas in Melbourne that can still project 70 millimeter film or Cinerama film or
Well,
widescreen film.
it's only two. It's only us and the Astor. The Rivoli were able to, because they set up for the Hateful Eight, but I'm not sure that that equipment is still there.
Ah, wow. Talk about a disappearing art form, but or projection form. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's great that you and the Astor still can continue this. So
Yeah.
going back to something you raised earlier, and something I'm always intrigued by, with all of the footage that you had, the film clips that you decided to use, interviews, of course, which are excellent with Leonard Maltin, as I mentioned, and other people. How did you go with the editing process and making decisions about what stayed in the film and what had to be removed?
It was the way I approached this was probably not the way you would normally approach a film. I purposefully, because most of the things we shot were, you only got one chance to get them, and so whatever we got on that day, I'd get home, I'd transfer the footage and back it up, and I'd have a quick look through it then. But then I wouldn't look at it again. So there was some stuff there I hadn't seen for 8 years in 2020 when I actually sat down and started editing, because I just wanted it to be fresh, and I didn't want to burden myself with the anxiety of, I wish we'd shot that, or I wish we'd got that, because I knew for most of those things we wouldn't have been able to go back. So when I started look, I overshot because I just wanted to. There were so many things I wanted to include. The first assembly of everything I thought was interesting to me was 8 hours. The first rough cut of what I thought was watchably interesting was 4 hours. So I got it down to two, but it was using the adventure, or my adventure through the end of film, or the first decade of digital, is the guiding point of the film, and it's the adventure that takes you through the whole thing. And doing we decided that yes, I would have to be that presenter a couple of years into shooting, and reluctantly I decided, okay, it has to be me. But I didn't, all of the voiceover and the narrative for the film, I didn't write until I was editing. It's a great luxury to be the director, the editor, and the presenter, because I could just sit here with my microphone and record something, try it, change it endlessly. It was actually a really lovely way to work, because you weren't restricted at all, and you didn't have to rely on other people's schedules, and I could just sit here and potter away.
Well done on doing that. And I know your film is 2 hours, but I would have loved to have seen the original 8 hours. It would have been interesting to see everything that you shot.
Well, there's so much great stuff. I really do want to turn it into something bigger, possibly a 3-part streaming project would be easily done, because most of the footage is still there. There is a longer version, because I always wanted to. There's a roadshow version, and a roadshow presentation, for those who don't know, it means that there's an overture at the beginning, walk-in music, an overture to curtains closed. Film starts, there's an intermission, and then an entr'acte, which is another piece of music to lead you into the second half. And I don't know any other documentary that's done this. This is the way the widescreen films were presented in the 60s, like a theatre-going event. And so I have a roadshow version, which is 2 hours 15. But I need a little bit more money to buy the rights for a particular sequence in that version. Yeah.
Yes, getting rights approval and funding and all that for that is always an issue, especially with the clips and etc. But hopefully there might even be a Blu-ray version which includes everything.
I hope so. Yes. We'll get it theatrically released first, and get it around the world. Let everybody see it, and then yes, we'll be doing some discs.
Now, in saying that, I noticed that there are some special screenings coming up with you, I think, doing Q&As for those screenings in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, I think.
And Adelaide now.
And Adelaide as well. Excellent. Late November into December. Is the film also being released or shown overseas?
Just festivals at the moment. We've just a few hours ago, my second session at Doc NYC finished. So that was our East Coast premiere. So that was really great to get in there. And we're looking for other festivals. That's probably the first place people in the States will be able to see it. The UK as well. But from that, I'm hoping we'll find a distributor, and there'll be a proper theatrical release in those other parts of the world.
That would be great, because I think your film deserves to be seen much more widely, and especially in cinemas. Yes, exactly. Rob, just a few quick final questions. As a filmmaker, what sort of films have you made, and how do you decide what you film?
I've mostly been an editor in my 30-year career, but I did have one other previous feature documentary that I directed before this one, which was about our illustrious chief at the Sun Theatre, Michael Smith. You may have known about this. He flew around the world, first person to do it in a seaplane.
Yep.
And so we made a feature film out of that, and that went really well. I have produced other films, but mostly an editor. I can handle a camera as well. All of these skills have been really useful for something that is mostly self-funded and self-made without help. Is that I can pick up a camera, I can edit, I can put on the producer hat. So I've done a lot of work for nothing. Not for nothing, but for no financial remuneration. Myself, my cinematographer, who's also a producer, and Ros Walker, who's also our other producer. None of us have worked. All of us have worked for nothing. And many other people have done the same. So, and I think the love and the passion for the project is there in every frame. I hope it is.
It certainly is definitely there. And yes, I do remember seeing the documentary about Michael's journey across the world on that seaplane or that plane. It's a fascinating story.
He's a character.
So, Rob, have you got other projects in the works at the moment?
I have two other things in mind, but I haven't actually started on them yet. So I'll get this one because the producer as well. It does drag on, and now I'm starting to see. Okay, I finished the film, and now there's a new mountain in front of me called distribution. Now it's a matter of getting it out there, and yeah, it's so much work to make a film, and certainly something of this kind of standard and ambition. So it would be a shame not to get it out there. So yeah, we really have to concentrate on making sure it has the best possible chance for people to see it, because I think it really is film buffs and just people who love the movies have been really surprised by it, and that's been really heartening. Is people who don't really have any knowledge of any of this stuff, and they come out of it and go, wow, I was so entertained. I loved it. It was such an adventure. It was such a ride, and I learned so much. And I always say, I learned so much as the last thing. So it means they enjoyed it first, they learned something second. Yeah, that's pretty good. If my non-target audience can enjoy it to that level, then I think it's worked.
Absolutely has worked. I fully agree with you. And my last quick final question, what is your best example of a film shot on film that just has that quality to it that makes it a perennial favorite?
Ooh, so many things spring to mind. Blade Runner is just its gothic look and feel really just sell and create that environment. I mean, you can go back to film noir, Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard. I love Psycho for the look of it and the way it's constructed. There are just so many films, so many classic films.
There certainly are, and I'm so glad that your film raises the issue of film versus digital projection. And it's been my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Splice Here, a Projected Odyssey, Rob Murphy. Rob, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.